This week marks PlayStation's 30th anniversary on December 3rd. It's been going for longer than I've been alive, though not by much. So to mark it, I wanted to reminisce on my years of play with PlayStation. The games, the blockbusters, the consoles, the moments that have defined my years of play with PlayStation. From my first ever video game to the modern day blockbusters that we get now. There'll be bigger missions, I'm sure, but these are just my PlayStation memories. First party, second party, and third. So, let's talk about my years of play, and let's start at the beginning. Crash Bandicoot on the PS1 was my first ever video game that I both saw and that I played. My parents, they had great taste. No doubt one of the most iconic video game characters, especially platformers. I obviously don't remember playing these games being so young, but I do have stories. Stories like basically, I was an arsehole of a child probably, and to get me to eat sometimes, my parents would put Crash Bandicoot on the telly just so I would open my mouth to digest my food. And honestly, I was probably starstruck. My mouth would just open in awe and therefore they could shovel the food down my throat. But on the flip side of that, as I got older and I could eventually play video games, if I was being a good lad, my parents would arrange for the PlayStation to be brought round to the house so that I could play Crash Bandicoot. And if I was being a little shit, then obviously they'd be like, oh, sorry, the PlayStation can't come today. And Crash Bandicoot, man, it was sensational. You know, Crash is just such a fantastic mascot for children to play these platformers, and it just has so many iconic moments, from the boulder chases to the platformers, and how those games iterated throughout the franchise to the game that we've got now with Crash 4. It's incredible. It was just special for me as a kid, from the hulbaga to the wow, and I feel like I can almost perfect those noises just because I played so much of it growing up. And I'd sit there, and as a kid, I'd just purposefully die and just watch the funny animations as I died, and I'd just sit there laughing for ages. And that's what it was all about, man. It was so special. Being so young, I obviously don't remember too much of the PlayStation 1. I know that I played Croc, and I played a few other games on the PlayStation 1, including, I've still got it, Masters of Terraskazi. I mean, Aspire, if you're watching, if you're around, if you're listening, can we do this one next, please? It needs a remaster by now. But there's also a PS1 game that I played for the very first time this year in 2024. Metal Gear Solid. Wow. I mean, some of my favourite creators that I like to watch on YouTube are huge Metal Gear Solid fans. They're always like, oh, I'm so sorry for being the unbearable Metal Gear fan. And after playing 1 and 2 for the first time this year, I'm actually like, mate, why are you not more unbearable? Like, everyone should play these video games. They are work of art. They are fantastic. Wow. From the writing, the music, the direction, to just how cool Snake looks, even in PS1 made graphics, man. I've only got through 1 and 2 so far as I wait for the Delta remake, but Metal Gear Solid is undoubtedly a PlayStation flagship franchise. It represents a different era of gaming, really. The tone of them, the lack of help or assistance really, how technical constraints can lead to opportunities in terms of how the game is made. For a PS1 game, and Metal Gear Solid 2 being a 2001 game, I was in absolute awe playing them for the first time this year. Just genuinely breathtaking. And what I will do is, for any games where I've made a deeper dive on or a different kind of video on, I'll leave everything in the description down below that's related to this video, so you can go and check that out if it appeases to you, rather than talk too long, because there's a lot to get through here, so you better buckle up. But yeah, like, seeing that as a PS2 game, and I guess speaking of that PS2 era then, this is actually the era that I dabbled with PlayStation the least, which is probably insane to many people, considering the PS2 is probably the most iconic PlayStation era to a lot of people. The truth is that in the PS2 era, my household was predominantly around Nintendo, so I never really got to the PS2 until later on. I did get to it, and I also went back and bought a PlayStation 2 a few years ago, and yeah, I can see why there is so much love for the PS2. And obviously with me getting to the PlayStation 2 kinda late, there's big games that I missed out on originally in Silent Hill 2, GTA San Andreas and Vice City. You got the Metal Gear Solid games, like I said. But for me, the PS2 era is defined by comic book games, crappy movie tie-ins to great movie tie-ins. You've got just a wide palette of, and even some of the most iconic PlayStation franchises that we know now, that was my first time I got to experience them on the PlayStation 2. And I do have a few of these games with me, and when I think of the PlayStation 2 into the early PS3 era, I think that's the greatest era of Star Wars video games. And none more iconic than Star Wars Battlefront 2. I mean, one of the greatest multiplayer games ever made with such an amazing campaign. And then, obviously, one of the best movie tie-ins for me in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And that's my favourite Star Wars film overall. And that's how I kind of think of it. Speaking of more terrific movie tie-ins, I mean, Spider-Man 2. Everyone talks about this game as the best web swinging in Spider-Man. And now look, I disagree. I think Insomniac have cracked it out with Spider-Man 2. I think that's the best feeling it's ever been. But this game was really ahead of its time. I mean, it had almost that Arkham-style combat that we all go to love now. And also, like I say, the web swinging. And it had such great cameos as well. Like the Raimi villains that we never got to see in the movies and that interpretation of it. To delivering pizza. It was a great movie tie-in. And there was lots of fantastic movie tie-ins that I think of the PS2. Got the Harry Potter games. Batman Begins, for example. It was the start of the MCU games on the PlayStation 2. It was pretty mad, actually, when you think about it. But because I didn't have a PlayStation 2, what I would do is I'd go around to one of my best friend's house and I'd play his brother at Pro Evolution Soccer. And I'm a big FIFA and I used to be a big PES guy, and PlayStation 2 is the era I think of Pro Evolution Soccer before it started to go downhill. It was iconic back then, before FIFA, which is obviously EA Sports FC now, kind of took the reins and is the main driver in that community. Now, in between the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3 was actually one of my favourite pieces of hardware from Sony, the PlayStation Portable. Now, there's rumours we may get a new kind of PlayStation Portable in the future, but again, there's a lot of iconic games on the PSP that I loved. I'm talking the Battlefront spin-offs with Renegade Squadron. There was a Star Wars Lethal Alliance, I believe it was called. I loved playing the FIFA games on my PSP, and I just loved having it. Like, it was a really great piece of hardware that I loved having around. I love the spin-off games that we got with it. I love it when we got a mainline game. I love playing the WWE games on there. The PSP was just a great piece of kit altogether. Onto the PS3, and this is where I come into my element here, because that PS3 era was when I got right into PlayStation. Everyone thinks of this era with the kind of janky, unrefined, AA. Sometimes you get the greatest game ever, sometimes it's the worst, but we look back fondly on that era in terms of the action games that we got with it. It felt like an era of experimentation, that you could go and do whatever you want and you still had a chance of being successful. Like Sonic, for example. Sonic Unleashed. What a weird Sonic game, and yet I absolutely loved it. The actual werewolf stuff, maybe not so much, but I thought as a Sonic game, it was a pretty competent Sonic game, I really did. But the PS3 is where I started to get my love for the PlayStation exclusives, and my introduction to some of the most iconic franchises that we know PlayStation for now. None more so than Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time. This is my favourite Ratchet & Clank game. Maybe it's controversial, maybe it's not, but maybe because it was my first, it just felt so special. This connection that Ratchet and Clank had, I just loved playing through that as a kid. And Insomniac nailed the fun with these games. Like, when you think of Insomniac now, I just think the way they've iterated over the years, they've become probably my favourite Sony developer that they have now. And I know they weren't the Sony, they weren't acquired by Sony back then, but I think it's one of PlayStation's most known and important franchises in that family-friendly era. And then again, on the exclusives front, Little Big Planet, man. I mean, I have so many cherished memories of this game. From the crazy alternative costumes that we had to buy and shed a load of money out for, just to the creativity. It was one of those games where, much like Astro Bot today, playing it would almost guarantee a smile on your face, especially as a kid. And you'd have the custom made levels, you'd be able to play through cooperatively with your friends, and like, I just remember getting home from school and wanting to log on and play multiplayer with my friends, whether that be couch, whether that be eventually online in the sequels. And yeah, Little Big Planet was special, and Sackboy was just a great protagonist that deserves more love now. He really, really does. And like, we got more Little Big Planet in 2 and 3, and they were still great. And they even had like PlayStation Move with the integration with that. And that, what a weird, I forgot about that in its entirety. And I think Little Big Planet today, maybe Nintendo take that realm in terms of the creativity. But I think it's a really important PlayStation franchise that definitely defined a period of my childhood. I spoke a lot about movie tie-ins in the PlayStation 2 era, But that still continued in the PS3 era. I mean, I spoke about the MCU beginning there, and I believe this was a PS2 and PS3 crossover game, but like, we'd get these games like Iron Man or whatever, and truth be told, this was awful. Like, it was, and Iron Man 2 I think was even worse, but it was cool, because you got to play as War Machine. And games like this, they could come out, and it wouldn't matter if they sold 5 million units, because they weren't the most expensive thing in the world, and they were just fun to play. Like, even the sticker, 2 for 20 quid. When the hell do you get that now? I'm like, this is the problem of everything going. Like, I couldn't make this video if everything was digital, for example. And here, 2 for 20 quid, $12.95 each. When would you ever go on the PlayStation store and see an Iron Man game where it's 2 for 20 quid? You just wouldn't. And I think the PS3 era as well. I mean, when we're talking about comic book characters, Spider-Man Web of Shadows, again, pre-owned, $34.99. An Activision game, which is now an Xbox game, and I hope Xbox can find a way to kind of restore the licenses for these games, because they are important, much like Ultimate Alliance and those games. But, I mean, this is iconic, right? That scene of sad Spider-Man walking through as all the helicopters are crashing around and the city's burning and it's getting overrun. I mean, it is iconic, you know? The symbiote enemies, the web combat, it was just so good. And speaking of superhero games, my favourite game of all time was hosted on the PlayStation 3, Batman Arkham City. But the Batman Arkham franchise I played for the first time on the PlayStation 3, and it was a PlayStation magazine where I first saw Batman Arkham Asylum. And I remember flicking through the magazine, and I wish I still had it, but I remember seeing it and being like, whoa, this is insane how cool this looks. And we just don't get this kind of stuff anymore, and it's important that we find a way to preserve these kind of things. But yeah, I mean, when I think of the PS3, I think of so many games, but Batman Arkham City being my favourite game ever made. Rocksteady just created something that is just so iconic to me. But I guess sticking on the superhero front, my probably biggest omission from all of these lists, now that I have played those first 2 Metal Gear Solids, is I've never played the infamous games that are on the PS3. They are locked there. Please, Sony, find a way to remake them, remaster them, whatever it may be. I need to play these games. Cole, I always thought, was such a cool protagonist, and I've never got to play them, and they always look so cool in the art design, in the be able to make choices, good, bad, the move sets, the power sets. I think Infamous should come back. I really do. But sticking with the PS3, one thing that I loved about this generation of consoles was that party and cooperative feeling. Unfortunately, a lot of my PS2 games and my PS3 accessories are tucked away at someone else's house, but, I mean, SingStar, man. This is what I mean. The PlayStation 3 had such a great era and great lineup of party games that people could come over, and it would be deemed cringy nowadays, you know, people look at Just Dance as quite cringy, but SingStar, DJ Hero, Buzz, I mean, iconic party games that don't really exist now and not in the same way, and I wish they did, because yes, they are cringy as hell, but when you're yelling your heart out to your favourite song down some crappy PS3 mic, and the game's telling you that you're a good singer, I mean, this is video game heritage right here, it really is. Like having people around for Christmas and getting Buzz and the controllers that you'd get, it was really, really special. And like you'd have little like, oi, like, do you know this one? Do you know this one behind someone's back? Just so you could win, and you do anything. Would it cause arguments? Absolutely. But the same thing applies for like DJ Hero. You'd get the little DJ deck, and you'd think you're some incredible DJ, but you're just playing a video game. And like, I hope we never forget this aspect of enjoyment and fun of video games. 2 more things to touch on for the PlayStation 3. The era of Transformers games on the PS3 is unmatched. Revenge of the Fallen, Dark of the Moon, and also the War for Cybertron games. Activision, please bring them back. Just get those servers running again. You will print money, I promise you. Those Transformers games were incredible. The art design of them, the actual gameplay of them was so much fun, and they had really good campaigns. They did. The movie tie-ins were fine, but the Cybertron games in particular were absolutely iconic. Any Transformers fan who grew up during that era will tell you how good these games really, really were. And then the final game, the game that I dumped, I don't even want to know how many hours into. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. I mean, when you think about how COD got a yearly refresh and still gets a yearly refresh, The amount of hours I must have spent on Modern Warfare 2 in that calendar year alone and the years past that, I mean, it is probably the most iconic COD. I know people love World at War, the first Black Ops, both fantastic entries. But Modern Warfare 2, I remember having to like fight my parents to let me get it because of the no Russian mission. Like me and my friends would all be like, oh, we can't get it, like the parents won't let us get it. And we were always like bickering and going on at our family. And then as soon as one parent got it, you were like, yes, we've won. Now they got it, can I get it now? And then we all got it. And man, the memories, like, we'd just sit on party chat and the toxicity of it all, or I'd just be sat there forgetting my mic's unmuted while I listened to fucking some cringy songs from the late 2000s. Like, it was vibes. Like, I hate to use that word, but it really was. It was just a brilliant time. Alright, one more PS3 game. Star Wars The Force Unleashed. I mean, we would never get a Star Wars game like this now, would we? I just can't imagine us getting a game like this. It was so unserious, pulling down Star Destroyers, the canon of it, of like Vader having an apprentice, and then, don't get me started on Force Unleashed 2 with clones and all that jazz, but these games they're still fantastic to play. Like, I went back and played Force Unleashed again last year, and yeah, they're special. They're special games, and it's how crazy the set pieces were in those games. Like when you fight Shark T and you've got the Sarlacc pit, and it's absolutely mental, and how all the combat works. No, it doesn't play as well as the Jedi games that we've got now, but yeah, I have a special spot for The Force Unleashed, and I love Sam Witwer as a character, and we'll talk about him in a bit with Days Gone. And I know I keep saying one more, but I'm doing this off the cuff. The PS3, of course, also produced what kickstarted modern PlayStation with The Last of Us, a series that now has more remasters than actual games, but that first game was extremely special. This is what Sony has become known for now, the third-person, big-budget action-adventure games. So let's talk about that generation, the PlayStation 4, the generation that really cemented PlayStation as my go-to console. When I think of the PS4, I think of those back-to-back E3s debuting and showing Spider-Man, Ghost of Tsushima, Days Gone, and The Last of Us 2 every year, you know? And it was just building to this grand final few years. But that's not to say that early PS4 wasn't great either. We got the ending to Rocksteady's Batman trilogy with Batman Arkham Knight, a game that I was on a trip on release day, and I remember waking up at 4 AM just so I could squeeze in a couple of hours on Arkham Knight. And I know people didn't like the Batmobile or the reveal of Jason Todd, and I know it had a horrendous PC port, but I think that Arkham Knight was fantastic. But I think that Arkham Knight is still the best playing superhero game now. Like, in terms of combat, I don't think Insomniac or any other game has got close to that feeling of that free flow combat. I really don't. And don't worry, Uncharted fans, I didn't forget about Uncharted, I was just waiting for it here. Because we also got the conclusion of the Uncharted series with Uncharted 4. It was a terrific ending, and it also probably acted in the PS4 cycle as that first blockbuster exclusive action-adventure game that embraced this new era of PlayStation. It's a weird one because I didn't know if I held much in terms of nostalgia for Uncharted. Uncharted 2, of course, has that incredible opening sequence which is ingrained in my video game brain, but outside of that I wasn't sure until I recently played Astrobot on the PS5 and they had a sequence dedicated to Uncharted. I was like, whoa, like, I'm really sentimental for this, and I was surprised about that. So I then went back and bought it on PC and played through Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy again. I was like, whoa, I do love these games. Like, they are fantastic and probably ahead of their time in terms of what we got on the PS3 and PS4 a little bit. And speaking of that early PS4 generation, we of course have to talk about Bloodborne, because that is still somehow the best version of that game, which is also the first From Software game that I ever beat. And oh man, is it good. The punishing but rewarding combat, the world, the bosses, the design, it's just brilliant, man. It's really brilliant. And speaking of third parties, we had some real gems too. We had Shadow of Mordor taking Arkham Combat and then giving us the Nemesis system, which was huge. And now it's patented, so we're all on the edge for that next Wonder Woman game because nobody else can do it. We got The Witcher 3, which is seen as one of the greatest RPGs ever made. A game that, admittedly, on my first playthrough, I really struggled with, but on my second, I absolutely adored its world, music, quests, story. a game that would create so much expectation for Cyberpunk 2077 years later. Of course, one huge video game series that has been absent from much of this video so far is Grand Theft Auto. But GTA 5 released on the PlayStation 4 and we're still getting them. We're somehow at about 8 versions of this game, but it was a fantastic GTA game. I mean, the ambition and the scope of it, and that's why everyone is craving GTA 6 now. You know, it's the 3rd best-selling game of all time, I'm pretty sure, and it felt like such a leap in terms of its quality and that rockstar refinement. But admittedly, like, towards the end of the PS4 cycle is when I began my move to PC gaming. But even with PC gaming, there was no access to that gargantuan PlayStation exclusive that Sony have become known for. So, let's talk about those late PS4 exclusives that I think have defined the modern PlayStation. In that late PS4 era, I started to go quite big in terms of collecting the games that I was buying physically. So, in that era, we're talking lots of steelbooks. We've got Days Gone, Marvel Spider-Man 2018, and Red Dead Redemption 2 here. And I do have a couple of other things. I've got a God of War one, and I might have a Horizon one. I'm not too sure. Stacked somewhere else. And yeah, like, these are the games that define that late PlayStation era and what took it from like a good generation to this well-remembered, iconic generation. And I just hate that we're moving away from this. Yes, Game Pass is great in terms of its value, but there's nothing cool. Like, this video wouldn't be as fun or as great to dive down my memories with without all of these boxes to just go through and look at and see them all over again and think of the memories that these games created. And I hate that we're moving away from it. It's so important that we retain some aspect of our physical media. So let's talk about those exclusives then. We're going to go in release order. So in 2017, saw the release of Horizon Zero Dawn. I mean, this game was bought in tangent with a PlayStation 4 Pro and a new 4K telly because this was a stunner. Like, I think, you know, the PS5 Pro is an impressive piece of kit. I don't have one. I've watched a lot of reviews on it, but the jump from the PS4 to the PS4 Pro was worthwhile. You could see the difference night and day. PS5 to PS5 Pro, maybe not so much, but seeing Horizon Zero Dawn on a 4K telly with HDR, I mean, I know the Horizon, everyone's like, oh, it's just a pretty looking game, there's nothing else. Look, I'm a Horizon enjoyer. Take that as you will. But I think these games, they play great. I agree that Aloy, yes, is a little bit wooden as a character, but I love this world that they created with the dinosaurs, the robot dinosaurs, and the combat of them, I think feels fantastic for an action RPG. And I think Zero Dawn in particular has a terrific story. Yeah, it has its ups and downs, but I just really enjoy Horizon's world. 2018 though, that was the year, man. I mean, I showed you Red Dead Redemption 2 before. We had Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I think we had Celeste as well. But on the first party front, I mean, God of War 2018 in February. I have very specific memories for this one. So I remember on launch day, going to Tesco to go and buy my local copy. And at the same time, just scrolling through my phone, I'm an Arsenal fan. And I remember Arsene Wenger was leaving Arsenal at the end of the season and being like shocked, like stunned about that news, being an Arsenal fan my entire life. And then buying God of War, getting home, having a massive spoiler spoiled for me without knowing it's a massive spoiler, and then opening up, booting it up, having that stranger fight and just being in awe and shock all over again after the Arsenal news. It was a whirlwind of a day. But my god, what a video game. The seismic scale of that battle was incredible. And I thought, man, like nothing is going to top this year in terms of the music, the story, the visceral combat, and it was just an absolute pleasure to play. It really, really was. So I'm there the entire year. Like, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed Red Dead 2, but not as much as God of War. And I'm like, nothing's going to top this, whatever. September rolls around, Marvel's Spider-Man. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I don't think I've had the same levels of excitement for a video game since the release of Marvel Spider-Man. I gobbled up every Game Informer article, every video, every bit of gameplay, speculation. I'd booked half a day in my old job and I just spent the morning like refreshing my feed. When's my collector's edition arriving? I booked my half day and bang, it got there at like 12:30. I was home by 1 and I was just playing it and I was into it. And yeah, like it is what Marvel Spider-Man, it's how we remember playing Web of Shadows, or how we remember playing Spider-Man 2, or how we remember playing Ultimate Spider-Man, but except it actually feels how we remember those games to play. It was incredible. It's one of those rare occasions where that level of hype and excitement I actually felt was matched. That very first swing, it was just incredible. And like I say, it was how you remember web swinging all those other games, except here, it was actually that satisfying. 2019 saw the release of Days Gone, and look, it didn't get greenlit for a sequel, but I enjoyed this one. Yes, it had patchy performance and so much unnecessary bloat, but I remember being so impressed by the Horde tech, and I love Sam Witwer, and he crushed it as Deacon in this game. Whenever people ask about Days Gone, I'm like, yeah, I recommend it. That bloat in the middle was just really bad, but on the other two ends of it, I think is a really competent video game there. And there was also Death Stranding, which, funny enough, was my first ever Hideo Kojima game that I finished. And I got to the end of it, and I was like, are they all this convoluted and confusing? It turns out yes. Yeah, yes they are. But Death Stranding was a game that we just haven't really had much like it since, and we do have a sequel on the way. And I don't know, I like Death Stranding. I don't love it in terms of the way I do with the Metal Gears that I've now played. But it was a very refreshing experience, and in a time where a lot of the big AAA games are unwilling to take huge risks, I think Death Stranding did take some bold stuff that I do appreciate it. So that was 2019. 2020. That was a year, wasn't it, to put it mildly? That was quite something. We saw the end of the PlayStation 4 with the really unusual release timing of both The Last of Us 2 and Ghost of Tsushima releasing a month away from each other. Look, I think The Last of Us 2 is an extremely impressive and ambitious game. I don't love it as much as the first one, and I think having with the timing of the pandemic, it was just a really uncomfortable time to play through that game. It had moments of beauty and humanity too, but I just don't have the fondest of memories of it, and I've never really wanted to go back and play it. Ghost of Tsushima, on the other hand, I absolutely adore this video game, and I can't wait for Ghost of Yotei. I mean, the world was just gorgeous, the amount of stuff that there was to do in it. It was repeatable, yeah, and a little bit Ubisoft, but the fact that the exploration was done in the way it was with the wind and following the creatures, but also Jin as a character was compelling, and it was finally the Assassin's Creed in Japan game that we'd all begged for, though arguably taken to another level. It also had such an overlooked multiplayer mode that is fucking incredible, by the way. If you own that game and you haven't played it and you've got some friends to play with, you absolutely should play it. It's magnificent. And that ended the PlayStation 4 so fittingly, and so began the PlayStation 5. And when you hear me talk about the PS5, I'll talk about it very differently from the prior generations in terms of not talking too much about third party, because I'm predominantly a PC player now, and my PlayStation is my exclusives. And those exclusives are still some of my favourite games of this generation so far. For starters, like, I love the DualSense, man. Like, I've just gone and bought the 30th anniversary DualSense Edge. Did I need this? No. But also, Sony, bring back these colour schemes, yeah? This is what makes PlayStation. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug. I will absolutely inject this shit into me for the rest of my life. But I think the DualSense is the most next-gen thing we've actually got this generation. Playing games like Returnal and feeling the raindrops, pulling back a bow and arrow and then releasing it, and then of course how Astrobot and Astro's Playroom used it and integrated it into that game. It was incredible, and I love the DualSense. Astro's Playroom then, I am deadly serious when I say until Astrobot came along, it is one of the best games of this console generation so far. I mean that. Astro's Playroom, yeah, it was a tech demo and it was bundled in. I would have put down hard cash to play Astro's Playroom if it wasn't equipped with the PlayStation 5. I mean, the charm, the catchy music, and sure, like I say, tech demo, but it's the best tech demo I've ever played. It really was. I mean, the charm of it, the catchy music, the mechanics, and it was just so much joy bottled into this little 4-hour experience. I mean, just what a genuine pleasure to play it was. Of course, the PlayStation 5 had a pretty solid launch lineup. They stunned us all when we got a new Marvel Spider-Man trailer, and it turned out to be a Miles Morales spin-off game, one that was very competent in that. It's a wonderful winter Christmas game to play through, and it gives you those kind of cozy winter vibes, but it tells a good Miles Morales Spider-Man story too. We also got Demon Souls, which I never finished, but I was like, whoa, this is what next gen can look like, and I'm just eager to see what Bluepoint are working on. I can't wait to see it. But one of my favourite games of this generation so far is not one that I thought I would be championing in the way that I do. Returnal, a sensational roguelike. I mean, I spoke about the utilization of the DualSense and feeling the rain, the directional audio where the enemies are at, the feedback from each kind of gun, and this incredibly addicting gameplay loop that is wonderfully rendered in this amazing sci-fi world. I was mesmerized by Returnal. It really is one of the best games of the generation for me, and it's a proper next-gen showcase. There was of course a few director's cuts which I'm going to ignore. The games of the PlayStation 4 era, yeah, they had some cool bells and whistles, but let's talk about the sequels to those PS4 games that I spoke about before, starting with Horizon Forbidden West. It was once again another visual showcase that it didn't quite hit that same level of storytelling of Zero Dawn for me, but gameplay wise, I think it's massively underrated, and I think these games have a terrific soundtrack too. But speaking of sequels, God of War Ragnarok, an all-timer, a genuine masterpiece. I mean, what a video game, what an experience God of War Ragnarok was. The emotion that that game provided was incredible. The refinement of it, just masterfully crafted. So many memorable moments, and the performances from Christopher Judge and the rest of the cast, just exquisite, it really was. A quick shout out as well to Valhalla, the free DLC that came a year later that just put the combat on a pedestal, and it made me appreciate it in ways that I hadn't before, whilst telling a really great story too. One that paid homage to the new God of War, but also felt like a celebration of God of War overall. And yes, I'm a PlayStation fan. Thor's Hammer from God of War, very cool collector's edition. And well, speaking of collector's editions and sequels, Marvel Spider-Man 2. All 19 inches of Venom. I remember you, Insomniac, you know what you did. Look, from a gameplay point of view, it was bigger and better in every way, and that first 2/3 of the story, they were magnificent. It did kind of disappoint on the Venom side of things, but it's still a really terrific Spider-Man game that I never imagined we'd get a Spider-Man game that played as good as those games do. And Insomniac have really carried the PS5 generation so far. We got the excellent Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, another genuine next-gen showcase of what these machines can do with the SSD tech, the DualSense and the audio. This generation was also a generation that I became a Final Fantasy guy. I played Final Fantasy VII Remake, Rebirth, 16, and I got deeply about 100 hours into Final Fantasy 14. And I get it now. There's this charm to them that you just don't really find elsewhere. This magic in its music, in its characters, in the worlds that they craft and create. Rebirth in particular, since I missed 7 on the PS1, it was a surreal experience. It felt like this huge journey that isn't done yet, but the scope of it in terms of how long it took to develop was so impressive, man. It really was. A lot of emotion, deeply engaging combat, and a world full of stuff to do, for better and for worse. And 16 is great too, by the way. Like, I loved that game, and that game, you will experience some of the highest highs in video games, period. It had some problems in its itemization and its characters and side quests, but those big icon battles and story moments and when the score kicks in, I mean, is absolutely breathtaking. But I also think that this year's kind of been slept on by a lot of people for PlayStation. I mean, sure, we had Concord, but Helldivers 2. There is no game out there that can provide that cinematic quality in a cooperative setting with the most explosive, dynamic, and dramatic moments that vary from game to game. It was a real moment in multiplayer games that I'm still playing it and I'm still loving it. And of course, to round it out, Astro Bot, man. There are very few things in life that you can put money towards and guarantee joy and guarantee a smile on your face. Astro Bot is one of those video games. I don't really smile, like grin from ear to ear when I'm playing games, but I just couldn't help it with this. I really couldn't. It is a pleasure to play. I don't care whether you're a kid, an adult. It is just a guaranteed smile on your face in the world, the homages that it pays to PlayStation franchise, and it's fitting because Astro Bot is a celebration of PlayStation, and it feels right to end on that. And that takes us up until now. And at a time where video games have become this toxic wasteland on social media and constant arguments that go too far on YouTube comments, that it's nice to just come back, remember what you played and reminisce on all of those things. Games that simply wouldn't be allowed to be spoken about in a positive manner now. And games can be so many things, man. They can bring people together to laugh and have fun. They can help you escape from your problems and provide respite and comfort. They can make you feel pure emotion and sadness and overwhelmed with joy. They can have you resonate with characters 5,000 times your power, but still be grounded. They can have you see yourself in someone you're not, in role playing. They can test you, make you be razor sharp in your reflexive shooters, provide challenging puzzles. But most of all, they're created by people who just want to entertain you, make you laugh, cry, feel overpowered, feel rewarded, or provide that sense of being able to escape. And I really hope that we never forget that. Video games wouldn't be possible without the people that make them. And PlayStation have made some truly unforgettable ones over the years. And as such, this concludes my years of play with PlayStation. So now I want to hear from you. What are your memories of PlayStation, childhood to where you are now, favourite games, consoles, moments, whatever it might be, hit me in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this long video, I'd appreciate you dropping a like. A lot of work went into this one and it's just been a blast to reminisce. And hey, if you like what I'm doing here, where I'm just passionate about the games that I play in an optimistic manner, then maybe consider sticking around and subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. I'd love for you to stick around. Otherwise, all my socials are linked in the description down below, so you can find me down there if you have anything else for me. Otherwise, play games, get gains, and I'll catch you next one.